Hey Pecan Creek artists, we're going to learn about watercolors and temper cakes today. We're going to learn how to add water to them and how to use them on our paper, being careful with our brushes. You're going to notice that watercolors look a little bit lighter, while temper cakes are going to look a little bit darker. And don't worry if your paints look like they're running out, because there's actually a lot of paint here that we can still use. So we use all of the paint up before we replace them.
Alright, so let's look and see how we use our watercolors in our temper cakes. The first thing you need to know is that you need water and a brush. You might want to be wearing an apron if you want to keep your clothes clean so that you don't get paint on them. And then when we use our watercolors or temper cakes, every time we're going to get new paint, we're going to wiggle, wiggle, wiggle our brush to get it clean and wet. We never tap our brush because it sprays everywhere. You can wipe your brush if you want to get rid of the extra water, but don't tap it because then it gets everywhere, okay? Wiggle, 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 wipe. Once you have your paints, whether it's watercolors or temper cakes, you're going to have to get the paint on the brush. So with the temper cakes, I do swirls like this, swirl, swirl, swirl. And the more I swirl, the more paint I'm getting and the darker my color will look. So swirl it until you get lots of paint. And then you can paint on your paper. So see, the temper cakes look nice and dark. And I still have more paint on my brush that I can paint with. If I want a new color, I'm going to wiggle my brush in the water to get it clean. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Okay? And then remember, no tapping, only wipe. Let's look and see how the watercolors compare to the temper cakes. So let's get some blue here. And on my watercolors, I'm just going to tickle my paints. I'm not going to do big swirls like I do with temper cakes. I'm just going to tickle it nice and soft. Okay? And then I can paint on my paper. Alright, so this is temper cake and that's watercolor. Let's try another color. Let's go wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Wipe. Now, this is my watercolor, so I'm just going to tickle my paints. Tickle, 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 tickle. Okay? And wipe. If it's not dark enough, I can go back and tickle my paint some more and try again. See how it got darker? The more times that I touch the paint, the darker my paint will look. But I'm not digging into my paints, especially with the watercolors, I'm just tickling them. Okay, let's try one more time now with our temper cakes. And you'll notice the temper cakes are divided. These are the cool colors and the warm colors. So there's 2 trays of temper cakes that you need. Okay, wiggle, wiggle my brush. Wipe. And then I can get my paint. And then remember, in my temper cakes, I'm going to swirl, 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 swirl. Okay. And when I'm ready, I can paint. So you'll see the temper cakes are a little darker than the watercolors, okay? So what we need to remember first is we always wash our brush, wiggle, 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 and wipe. If the water looks too dirty, we can get clean water by pouring it in the sink and filling it up, okay? If I'm using my watercolors, I'm going to tickle my paint. I'm not going to dig into them. If I'm using my temper cakes, I'm going to go swirl, 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 swirl until I have enough paint, okay? If you have questions, make sure you let me know.